Welcome back, and we are so grateful that our next panel will discuss a juvenile mental health court and or diversionary practices. This session is for all of you back home who want to create your own mental health court or set up your own diversionary practices and how we get there. We have a really stellar group of juvenile practitioners and professionals, and rounding us out and beginning with introducing Judge Daphne Previti Austin. Prior to assuming her responsibilities as a district judge in 2015, attorney Daphne Previti served as an assistant district attorney from 1997 to 2008 and became board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in Juvenile Law in 2002. Throughout 2008 to 2014, she practiced criminal and juvenile defense in her own private practice. While serving as a district judge, Daphne created the 289th MIND, M-I-N-D, Males in Need of Direction Court, which provides services to young men with identified mental health needs, the first court of its kind in the country. In 2017, she began presiding over a similar program providing services for young women with identified mental wellness challenges, the 289th Crossroads Court. Daphne Previti Austin now serves as an attorney in private practice throughout Bexar County. Laura Prillwitz, we are welcoming from my neighbor county and who has helped me personally with the setting up of mental health court, is the Deputy Director of Juvenile Probation and Juvenile Mental Health Court SOAR Coordinator. She is a certified juvenile probation officer and a licensed professional counselor. She has over 30 years of experience in mental health and over 25 years in juvenile justice. She is co-chair of the Denton County United Way Behavioral Health Leadership Team, Child and Family Work Group, and serves on the Advisory Council for Denton County's Commercial Sex Trafficking Protocol Team. John Jordan, Assistant District Attorney for 19 years in Harris County, Texas, prosecutor in 3 different district courts. And in that district attorney's office, he has held many leadership roles. He has been chief prosecutor in 3 different district courts. He has been the chief of child exploitation section, where he worked hand in hand with ICAC officers to conduct sting operations to apprehend online predators who were seeking encounters with juveniles. And we all know Harris County, his jurisdiction, is a very strong hotspot. In addition, he has been the chief of various divisions within the district attorney's office, including the misdemeanor division, the grand jury division, the police intake division, and the felony trial division. In November of 2017, Kim Ogg asked him to lead the juvenile division and tasked him with expanding diversionary programs and improving the police intake process of juvenile cases. We also round out the panel with our own Matt Smith, who is the Assistant Executive Director as well as the Director of Mental Health Services for the Williamson County Juvenile Services Department in Georgetown, Texas. Matt is a certified juvenile probation officer and a licensed professional counselor supervisor. He earned his bachelor's degree in English and psychology from the University of Texas at Austin and his master's degree in human services with a focus in professional counseling from St. Edward's University. Matt began working in juvenile justice in 2001 as an associate psychologist with the Texas Youth Commission at Brownwood State School. He has worked for the Williamson County Juvenile Services Department for the past 18 years. I want to welcome you by starting with, out of this very strong panel, I'll begin with Laura Prillwitz and ask each panel member to tell a little bit about your mental health court or diversionary practices. And beginning with Laura, if you would just tell us a little bit about your program, a general overview.
Thank you, Judge Wheelis. When we first looked at developing our mental health court, we looked at juveniles that were at risk for removal from their homes that had mental health because they were becoming unmanageable. And so we decided, instead of focusing on a deferred, we would look at post-adjudication youth that had a moderate to high risk of risk and need. And so what we did is we created an intensive program that included not just the youth, but also the family and looked at using community resources. That was the other thing that we really wanted to focus on, was instead of having our own counselors that these families would work with, we wanted the resources to be in the community so that when they finished the program and went through the court, that they would also be able to continue working with these same community resources so it would not interrupt their programming. So that's kind of where we started in looking at how we wanted to design it. So it's a 6-month minimum program. We do have an aftercare afterwards to help them integrate back down to less therapy and be able to be more self-sufficient. We have kids that have dual diagnoses. Primarily, we're doing mood disorders, it looks like, most of the time, but we also are seeing an increase in our autistic kids. I think that's pretty much a good overview.
Who developed the model and who started the program?
Well, in looking at it, I was concerned about our mental health increasing here in Denton County. And so in talking with our chief and then going and talking with our judge, Kimberly McCary, who incidentally is awesome at working with these kids, we decided that we wanted the program like this. And so I worked on a logic model, which incidentally, I encourage anybody that's going to start a program like this to do a logic model. It really is a great way of kind of laying out everything that you want in your program, what data you're going to measure to make sure it's successful, but it also really gives you a focus. So create a logic model, and in working with Judge McCary, we talked with our district attorney, juvenile district attorney, Karen Anders, who was amazing. And we just were able to talk this out and come to agreement that we felt like this mental health court would really be beneficial for Denton County.
And who were your early partners? And if any holdouts existed, how did you handle those?
You know, we really didn't see any holdouts per se. It was really a lot of people getting on board once it was explained and looked at what our goals would be and how we wanted to accomplish things. I felt like everyone pretty much was really in agreement. So I don't know that there really were any holdouts in our county. We were really blessed.
Doubling back for anyone out there watching who wants to follow the logic model, can you point to some resource, or is that listed in your handout?
I didn't list it in a handout. There are a lot of logic models out there. I'm open to anyone that wants to contact me to kind of show you what logic model we used, if anyone is interested in it. But there's a lot of resources out there on how to do a logic model. It really looks at your objectives and your goals and your resources, and then it looks at what you want to measure and when you're going to measure it and what your projected goals are. It really is helpful.
So how do you fund your program?
Well, that was the other thing. Now, that was something that we really had to work at, was getting funding, because, funding is always the issue. And so our program we're in our 5th year, incidentally. So in getting it going, we finally got local funding from our commissioners, who were really awesome. And just when we got approval for funding, a DSA grant came up. And because I had this logic model already designed and ready to go, it didn't take very long to really do the application for the DSA grant. So I was able to get us a 4-year grant to begin this program, which was just phenomenal. I mean, that was a real break for us. So the first 4 years were paid for by a DSA grant through TJJD. And then this last year, the grant ran out, which was really bad timing because right in the middle of COVID and all the budgets were tightening up. And I thought, oh boy, now what? But our commissioners were so awesome. And Judge McCary, we've done such a phenomenal job of presenting it to them. And she really, I can't speak highly enough of her. Anyway, we got the funding. So I was real excited about that.
All right.
Locally.
Sorry. Let's talk a little bit about who is your target population and who are the kiddos in your program, and what type of offenses, if any, are ruled out or diagnoses maybe?
So again, our target kids are the ones that are at a higher level of risk and need. We're not looking at sex offenders because we have specialized programs for them already. And so our kids we're looking at with mental health, and not just ADHD. Again, we have lower level programs that can address that. So most of our kids turn out to be kids with mood disorders. And it's really interesting. I really wasn't sure what offenses we were going to really see the most of. But what we found is assault family violence and assault public servant being teachers have been the biggest. In fact, almost all of our kids, those are the offenses. And so we know that there's a lot of emotional dysregulation. We know there's a lot of power control struggles. And we also know that our parents, by the time we get them, are worn out. And so we also provide a parenting component to help support them and to also give them some new skills and techniques to try, because these kids can be really tough.
Can you tell about an average week for the family and the child in the program and describe what kind of programming they're required to participate in?
It's real intensive. It's like creating intensive outpatient with mental health court put together. And so you have the mental health treatment and the accountability, which for me, we're seeing are more effective. Instead of just mental health or just court, with both, it really is powerful. And so these kids see the probation officer at least twice a week, and she is phenomenal. I have an incredible probation officer. We also have a case manager that's great, and she works with them doing skill building with them. She sees them individually once, and she also sees them in group once a week. They get a parenting class. And then on top of that, we're connecting them with therapists in the community, and we're doing it individually. And so we don't just have one or two therapists. We're trying to see what that particular child and family need, and then try to match them with a therapist in the community that can really specifically deal with those needs. And so we have equine therapy, we have individual therapy, we have all kinds of therapies to really kind of present to them.
And so does the juvenile probation department provide most of your counseling, or are you trying to connect the children and families with the LMHAs in the community?
In the community. So we have contracts where we're contracting with a lot of these counselors just in case we need help financially, because it is a big financial burden. But we want them to be connected in the community. And in fact, we really encourage our kids to do pro-social activities, to get them really involved in positive things in the community, supports, and really connect them in as strongly as we can.
And do you have people in the community that are essentially donating services, or how are you contracting with equine therapy? How are you doing?
We're contracting with them. Some of the parents are paying for part of it. We're paying for another part of it. We have had some equine therapy that's been offered to parents for free, pro bono, by one of our local agencies, which has been phenomenal. But we really kind of manage it through local funding.
Pretty stressful to have a child who has all these high risk, high needs, or moderate risk, moderate needs, because of the feeling of loneliness. And this team, I'm assuming, provides those supports. So it's not surprising that you give equine therapy for the parents as well. Have you found any measurements that would be noteworthy to share with the rest of us who are just starting in?
Well, our program is, again, we're in our 5th year, which is when we're really starting to get some good data coming out. But probably the most noteworthy is, so far, of our kids that have graduated, 73% have not reoffended. Our goal is 80%, so we're working on that, but we're really pleased with our initial results.
Yes, fantastic job. That is fantastic. And not reoffended in any way.
Correct.
Right. No new offenses. Can you talk a little bit about decreasing other placements by the implementation of this court?
That's the data that I don't have specifically related. I do know that our placements are for mental health are reducing, but I can't really quite get that data to the court and connect it. But I do know they are decreasing.
And prior placements, were they paid for out of county, or did you only use the state resources like Vernon's hospital?
No, the county was paying for it. So even though we're supporting this program, we feel like it's kind of a trade-off, and it's more effective because when you get the families involved, there's more permanent change. Whereas if you send a child to placement, particularly out of county, which a lot of ours were, then they come back and then it's great for a few weeks and then they kind of drift back without that support. So
absolutely. Have you noticed any self-sabotage or any of those kinds of unique issues or concerns?
I think so, but part of it is, I think after a while, most of the kids really buy into the program. In fact, a lot of them don't want to leave once they're there, which is why we got the aftercare to kind of help step them down, because they've been bullied, they've been picked on, they haven't fit in, and it's kind of like they find a group that they fit in with. And so yeah, there's been some self-sabotage kind of just to stay in the program. And we've had to kind of work through that and encourage them to be self-sufficient, and that they've got that. They can do it. They can use their skills.
And I would want to bask in the light of Judge Kimberly McCary myself. So I get that. One of the really interesting panel questions that's come up is, are the kids in your program being assessed for possible traumatic brain injuries? Neuropsychological evaluation.
When we see the need for a neuro, we have requested it, but it's not very common. We do have a lot of kids that have trauma, PTSD, and we do look at trauma-informed care. We have done autistic studies, but really that has not been a huge one in our court so far, but we have referred some for neuros.
Anything that you'd like to add about your program or any of your success?
It's just been an incredible journey. And these kids are really awesome to work with. And I have an incredible team. I'm very blessed here in Denton County. I just have to brag about them. I encourage people, if you want to start a court, please visit other courts. It's an interesting journey.
And you did visit other courts. I apologize for not asking you about that.
Yes, I did. And that was very helpful in some things that I wanted to do and some things we didn't want to do. But, and let me give a shout out to El Paso. El Paso was extremely helpful.
Yes. They've helped us as well. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And as has Denton County. And thank you, Laura Prillwitz, who is a stellar member of that team. And I've seen them in action. They do a good job.
Thank you.
All right. And switching to Judge Previti Austin, if you would, kind of the same general description, and yes, thank you for unmuting, and basically just the same questions I was going over with Laura. If you could just tell us a little bit about your program, a general overview, and I know that you are talking about past tense to some level. But we are very impressed with your programs, and being the first in the country is really shout out to you for your leadership as a judge.
Well, thank you. We were really excited to grow our programs. Bexar County was in a fortunate position where we had a lot of programs started by one of our former juvenile judges, Laura Parker, and she had started the girls' court basically for the same reasons that Laura's group did. They were spending a lot of money on placements for kids that maybe could have been reached without placement. And so they were looking for an alternative. So she started that court probably in the late 2000s, around 2008 or so. And so we had good results with it. And having been a prosecutor and a defense attorney in the county before I was on the bench, we knew that it would be really nice to have something similar for the boys, because we were seeing a lot of boys come to court and there just really wasn't a similar service available for them. So when I first got elected in 2014 and took office in 2015, I made it known to our grant writing team at the Juvenile Probation Office that I was really interested in starting a program for boys. And we were blessed because we actually applied for a grant that was more meant for police officer training, for the crisis intervention team type of training. And they were so impressed with our grant writers that we actually received the grant to start the Mine Court mid-2015. So it was just a few months after I took office that we were able to do that. And the process for that grant was a 1-year planning and implementation type of grant, and then 2 years of funding the program. And so we got that beginning around October of 2015, and we put together a task force in the community of interested parties. We had family alliance people, we had the local mental health, private hospitals. We also had members from communities in school. We had members of the DA's office, of the Juvenile Probation Department, and the court, of course. We had a dedicated defense attorney that came, and everyone worked together about once a month for a year. We considered ourselves a task force to decide what would be the best way of creating this program. So we created it from the bottom up, specifically for young men that maybe didn't have a male role model in their lives. And then we sought out a male probation officer and a male dedicated defense attorney that they could get to have some continuity with. And that really helped with respect to this boy-specific court. Part of the training was teaching them how to look people in the eye, shake hands, just different things that maybe if they didn't have that male role model, they wouldn't get that training. Again, one of the gifts that we provided to all of them was a tie when they graduated, and they had a class on how to learn how to tie the tie. So it was just things like that that made it boy specific. So we were really grateful to get that going. And after the program started, that task force continued to be invested locally and continued to meet once a month for the first part. And then we switched to quarterly meetings so that they could get reports on how the court was doing and continue giving us input as we continue to develop the program. The idea really for the court was because there's a lot of people that get arrested that have mental health issues that may go to jail for a few days, for a few weeks, and then they get released on a time served sentence as an adult, and they never really get any help or any treatment. And so I wanted to stop that revolving door of people constantly coming through, getting arrested for very minor infractions, perhaps drinking beer on the site of a convenience store, and they get a criminal trespass warning, and then they just sit in jail for 3 weeks. And so we were really hoping to stop that. We created a toolbox for the kids so that they knew what their symptoms were, what they could do if they were in need of medication or in need of counseling services in their community after they left us. We wanted them to know how they could stay stable mental health wise for the rest of their lives and hopefully avoid ever coming back to court.
That sounds excellent. Can you delve a little bit deeper into their own safety plan? What were some of the signs and symptoms that they should watch out for in themselves?
Well, it kind of depended on what their individual diagnosis was. And we accepted a lot of children, and we didn't want the people that just had kind of a first dabble with something more minor. Someone that maybe had been getting in trouble because of their mental health were the ones who were trying to help. We did not include kids that had oppositional defiant disorder, kids that were intellectually, developmentally disabled, because really we're trying to create a group. We'd have 12 kids in the court at a time. We wanted them to kind of help and boost each other. So we wanted them to be able to at least be able to follow along with the programming as a group. We didn't want to have to slow down for some kids that might not be able to keep up with the group. We had other programs in the county for those other children. We have an intensive clinical services unit that would provide additional services. This was more about getting these kids to kind of help each other and lead each other as well. So because of that, we also tried to keep the age range similar. So we had mostly kids in the 12 to 14 year age range. If their mental illness caused them to kind of be a little bit younger mentally, there might be a 15 or 16-year-old in the group, but we're trying to keep the group substantially similar. So some kids, they might start feeling the need for medication. A lot of kids would use street drugs. And so we wanted them to know those feelings that they were getting health-wise, medically-wise, to know that, it was normal for them with their diagnosis to possibly require medication. And then also a big component was, as kids grow, their dosage needs change. So we wanted them to know that that was normal, and that if they experienced that, that was when they needed to call for a doctor's appointment.
Excellent. And that's excellent for the whole rest of their entire lives. Can we talk a little bit about funding? You said you started out with an exploratory task force. How did it get off the ground?
So we had received a grant from the Council for State Governments, and it was the 3-year grant. So it paid for everything, and it paid for the team. It did not pay for the task force. All those people were volunteering their time, but it paid for a counselor. It paid for there was another, I forget exactly what that person's title was, but they were not a counselor. They were kind of like a person that kind of helped facilitate everything. And then there was also a half-time parent liaison that was involved. And that was really helpful and kind of different than any of our other programs that we had, because when there's mental health involved, a lot of times it could be generational, and it could also be learned in the respect that if somebody has a family member that has mental health issues, some of the just ways of going forward throughout life, they get masking skills, things like that. And so we wanted the family to know the same things we're teaching the kids, to help the kids learn if they were starting to slide, but also to give those family members those skills. And that was really helpful, because a lot of times we required that there be an interested adult available. But a lot of times if that parent started succumbing to their own mental health, it would affect the kid's success in the program. So it was good that everyone was getting the training.
Thank you so much. Any parting advice for anyone trying to set up their own MIND program?
There's a lot of interest out there in helping kids. So I think it's easier when you're looking for juvenile resources, because people are always wanting to help kids versus, helping adults. So it's just being positive messaging, tapping into the resources that are already in your community, and seeing how you can go from there.
Thank you. And an excellent segue to our district attorney, our assistant district attorney, because it's a schema shift. We have to try to save them now before they hit the adult system. And that's precisely what John Jordan's been working on. So if you could take it away there.
Good morning. The thing that we would encounter, first of all, we've expanded from one diversion program to a total of 6 now. But this diversion program I'm talking about today is the first program. And it was pretty common what we would see. And those of y'all who work in the system are going to understand this. Parents are at home and there's a conflict within the home. It usually starts with the parent taking over the child's cell phone and an argument ensuing, or quite frankly, it would be inappropriate discipline on the parent's behalf. And then what ended up happening is the kid would lash out. They would assault their parent, grandparent, or guardian, and they would call law enforcement because they didn't know who else to call. Law enforcement would get there. We would accept charges. They would be arrested. They would stay in jail for 2-3 weeks at a time because the parent was done and finished with it. Then what would happen a couple months later, that same parent would want to dismiss, have the cases non-suited, and then we'd non-suit it, and then we're back to the same home 6 months later, right? It was just a vicious cycle. And we felt like there had to be a better way to do this. So we collaborated with folks around the country. And specifically, I spoke with the juvenile division chief in King County, which is Seattle, Washington, and they had a family violence diversion program. And they called it the FIRS program, Family Intervention Restorative Services. So what we did is we adopted a similar program. We added a T on the end for Texas, and that's why we call it the FIRST program, the Family Intervention Restorative Services of Texas. And so it is designed to deal with this population of family violence assaults. We have a philosophy that we're trying to reduce the number of cases originating from schools and from the home, the two places that kids have to be. And it's been pretty successful. The way it works is that when the officer makes the scene, they do call my office. We do authorize an arrest or detention, and then the kid is taken away for a cooling off period. They end up in detention. Then we've partnered with the Harris Center, which is our mental health folks, and their MCOT team will then make they will make contact with that family member, that victim, within the first 24 hours and let them know there is a better way. We don't have to file the case. And we get their commitment that they have to get the child out within 48 hours because that's when they're going to go in front of a judge. And if they get them out, then we can put them in the diversion program and never file a petition in juvenile court.
I guess that has required a lot of interaction and collaboration with law enforcement. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, we started this venture with our local law enforcement agencies because we just filed way too many petitions historically here in Harris County. Before I got involved, we did the data from juvenile probation, and we would have 11,000 arrests and 8,000 petitions filed every single year. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I know other jurisdictions are like, wow, that's a lot. We've now cut that at least in half over the last couple of years. So it was part of an all-encompassing training to HPD and the Sheriff's Department, the constables, and all the school districts that we're trying to reduce the footprint and expand diversions. We do have the benefit here in Harris County that we are a direct file jurisdiction. So an officer does call us at the scene prior to an arrest. So it happens on a case-by-case basis when these family violence police officers or patrol officers at the scene, we talk them through the program. And quite frankly, the officers have been some of our biggest supporters in this because they're at the scene. It's chaotic. They want to get the kid out of the scene, but they don't want to charge them. And very often we would hear, John, we don't know what can we do here? And now there is a better way. And they can leave the scene knowing that they are doing a good thing, protecting those folks and getting the violence out of the home that day, but they're also going to not be back there a week from now because we're going to get them the services that they need.
Okay, so some of the chat questions we're receiving, and thank you for all of them. One of which I think that, John, you could speak to directly is that if the police officer knows they're a mental health case, why do they need that cooling off period in jail? Why send them to jail first instead of to the program that you referred to? And can you explain a little bit of the logistics of what we're talking about here? What offense is likely to have been committed, et cetera?
Yeah, the offenses that we're dealing with is Class A assaults. It can involve a weapon. So if it's aggravated assault, it doesn't qualify. But as y'all well know, sometimes aggravated assault is really a deadly conduct. So it could include Class A assaults, Class A deadly conducts, Class B terroristic threats, as well as any kind of criminal mischief. And it doesn't necessarily have to have a mental health component, but just the reality is we know most of these cases are mental health. Frankly, half of them are the parents and not the youth. So that's kind of what has been shaken out. And frankly, also, since COVID has hit, we have actually utilized something other than detention. We do try and get other family members, friends of the family to come and take the kid overnight, mainly because we know the child's not going to stay in detention for very long. So why put them in a facility where they could bring COVID in or they could get COVID themselves? So it has drastically reduced the number that goes to detention. And ideally, they're not even really processed. They're just going there for that short time frame. So keep in mind, we're not asking the officers to diagnose the mental illness. What we're doing is we're getting EPCOT, the people who are the experts, to reach out to the families within the first 24 hours. And the whole idea is to get them the referrals to find out if there is a mental health disorder. If there's not, at least there's a teenager disorder, which we can all appreciate, and they need some kind of help.
Thank you. And also, that speaks to the law enforcement responsibility. They have their first duty is safety to the community.
Yes.
And so in that home at that moment, they qualify for an arrest because it is unsafe to leave them in the home, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So, and to your point, we're not asking them to analyze mental health, but they've been so good in your jurisdiction at tipping you off to, I think this is a mental health situation.
Yeah, and as you all well know, like Denise Onken was kind of a pioneer in mental health here locally in the adult system. So we have, law enforcement has engaged, and we gotten in, when you were talking about training, the Houston Police Department before COVID had given us 2 hours of both mental health as well as juvenile division to train all 5,000 police officers at one or twice a week, about 100 officers at a time, to let them know about how we're treating mental illness as well as juvenile law. And I can tell you, we got great responses from the HPD officers. Once COVID hit, we couldn't meet in person, so they've been doing it online. But again, I have yet to meet a group of officers who they're all on board. They want to engage. They want to help youth. They understand there is a distinction between folks who are in crisis and folks who are really detrimental long-term to our community.
Thank you so much. Any parting advice to those of us who want to start our own?
All right, so this is what I would say, is just do it. With our experience, because we've been very successful, is that there's a whole lot of planning that is involved, and there's a whole lot of meetings, and that takes you 6 months or 9 months. This was created by the Harris County Juvenile Probation Department, which has been gung-ho about all of our diversions, the Harris Center, and us. And then we started it. And then it was, let me just be frank with the language, it was a shit show at first, right? For the first 2 months, it was problematic because we're not dealing with Eagle Scouts. We're dealing with parents, families, and children in crisis. And it's not easy. But to give you an idea, since February 2019, when we started this program, we have serviced 330 youth that would have gone to jail and would have been charged. We have only filed 12 petitions on all of those cases. And we never file if it's the parents not helping. We only file those 12 cases because the youth was refusing to go to services. So, okay, we're going to go ahead and file on them. If it's the parents not cooperating, not wanting, we're not going to file on that youth because why file them in court if the parents aren't going to be there as part of help, right? So that would be my biggest suggestion, is if you're thinking about doing it, do it. One last parting word. One of the reasons why we're so passionate about our diversions is everybody understands the need for diversions because it keeps it off the kids' record to have a petition filed in any kind of adjudication. But there's another aspect. Remember how I told you we filed too many cases in Harris County that we're working on? Because of our numbers, it takes us 6 weeks to get a youth to court for the first time if they go home. And it takes 5 or 6 settings, which takes about 9 months to finally go ahead and get a resolution. It's a different kid. And so the beauty of all of our diversion programs, and partner with our Harris County Juvenile Probation Department led by Henry Gonzalez, is we get them the help they need within a week and get them in services, and we're changing lives. So we're extremely excited about it.
I am too. That is fantastic. Wow, 330. You are saving lives. That's amazing. And get them engaged before the age of 18, and they're set for life. We have a question that's really important, and maybe Matt can deal with it, or maybe when we get to the question and answer session. Dual status youth is an ever increasing population that is so highly at risk. Matt Smith from Williamson County has extraordinary information and contribution in the trust-based relational intervention programs. And then everybody else be considering how we deal with children in CPS custody or having previous CPS history, and also juvenile delinquency justice system issues for your panel question responses when they come up. Matt, take it away.
All right, thanks, Judge Wheelis. So we necessarily have not started a mental health court, but instead an overhaul of our juvenile system. And it started in about 2014. We were looking around and looking at data and recognizing that we had a as much of the other panelists have said, I had a lot of kids in outside placement. It was costing a lot of money, weren't seeing great outcomes. Had a lot of kids returning to court for violation of probation. And we were throwing lots of services at kids and seeing some impact, but not what we wanted to see. And around that time, we became aware of, through some training with our local mental health authority, of the term trauma-informed care. And many of us began then a journey where we started to understand, and have been on this journey for a number of years now, just the impact of trauma on our kids, and that really is the root cause of what we're seeing in our system. And so there were lots of key moments and aha moments along the way. But in general, what we recognized is we did not have enough therapists on board, even though we had quite a few, to be able to really help our kids transform and families transform the way they needed to be successful. And so we reached out for help to our community, and we were fortunate to come across really two frameworks, one out of the Search Institute in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the other trust-based relational intervention out of the Care and Purpose Institute for Child Development at TCU. And in general, what we found was just a breadth of research and data. And to speak to the dual status issue, especially with TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, all of that work and research had been done with kids in the foster care system. And so we were able to sort of get this picture and look at some local data and recognize that the histories of the kids in our juvenile system, when we looked at their adverse childhood experiences, they were very similar to that data in the CPS system. And so, as an example, 83% of the kids in our juvenile residential program, we found had previous historic contact with CPS. Over half had a case opened, and more than a quarter had previously been placed out of their home. And so we started to become more and more aware of that crossover. And from there, it was just a realization that no matter the offense, no matter the diagnosis, no matter what we were seeing, we needed some universal approaches to help all of our kids and families. And so to boil it down, we began focusing still on safety measures and offense and things that are important for community protection, but also how can we address the root cause of what's going on with these kids and families. And so we know that many of them have come from lives of toxic stress and childhood adversity. And the keys to resilience, really, what we found through our journey were fairly simple. And that is getting them to a place where they feel safer in our care, but also safer in their communities, providing connection for them. And that is connection both to pro-social activities, which we call sparks in our community, and also alongside that to healthy adult relationships. So many of our families are disconnected from the community where a lot of those relationships generally occur. And so getting them initially connected to those places is key. And then finally, just a real recognition that so many of the kids that come through our doors, they missed a lot in their early years through neglect or abuse or just struggles in schools, struggles in their families. So we have to go back and reteach some of the things that kids learn early on. We have to teach how to regulate. We have to teach basic social skills. And so instead of just focusing on, the behavior and the sanction or what's the consequence going to be, it was a realization we've got to go reteach and provide some opportunity for kids to try this out and learn and grow. And there are going to be mistakes along the way. We know that. So it was sort of wrapping around families and then staying with them through the process that really changed things for us.
How difficult was it in terms of culture and departmental ways, switching from progressive sanction or the old sanction guideline level to trust-based relational intervention?
It's been quite a journey, and it was very difficult up front. I will say we did have a lot of people who, as we provided training opportunities over the years, were opening their minds to that. And so a lot of our staff and, attorneys and people we connect to, the schools, is really just a great thing to see the open-mindedness. But having said that, there was so much room for change, and just sort of being in a system for so long where it was, if you do this, this is the consequence, and then we move you on to the next phase. This is a lot more difficult. There's a lot more judgment involved. There's a lot more patience and tolerance involved. And so what happened over time, though, is people began to see success in using the framework and using a new set of skills, and saw the outcomes on the kids and families. And that really helped push it along. The other thing I would say is, lots of champions along the way. Judge Matthews, our juvenile judge, who's a commissioner, she immediately got on board. We set up a conference for attorneys and judges within our county and law enforcement, so they could be more educated. She requires our defense attorneys to go through that training. And so that's eye-opening for them at the very beginning. Anybody who wants to be on the juvenile bar here. And just conducts court that way and expects all of us to do that, and has brought in things like therapy dogs into court hold when kids are waiting to reduce their stress. And so while it has been quite a journey, we've had lots of community support and support from our judges and other really critical officials in this process.
Judge Matthews is particularly wonderful, I agree, and a fellow commissioner. One of the questions I had, though, is really down to the details or nitty gritty. Did you start with juvenile detention, and how did that go? Because that's the strongest culture, I think, of any of us. How did that go?
Sure. So we started with facilities. So here for us, the Juvenile Detention Center, but also our post-adjudication residential placement that's now residential treatment focus. And so it was quite a change for our staff. And so as an example, with our residential program, prior to having the TBRI framework, we were operating under a military discipline structure. And so it's quite different from TBRI. And so there was, as we've talked about, a little bit of resistance, obviously, but also it's a brand new skill set. And so one of the key pieces that we saw early on is we were instituting a lot of nurture into our program that wasn't there previously. But you have to have a balance when you do this. And so you can't forget about the structure. And so in our detention center, for example, I think staff were really trying hard with the nurture, but we weren't holding kids accountable early on. And what TBRI is all about is a blend of that structure and nurture. And there's a lot of accountability. You're intervening quickly when things aren't going the right way, but you're doing it in a trauma-informed way. And once we figured that out, things got much easier.
I have to admit to a little bit of reluctance on my own part. Just, we do need to really rehabilitate, and sometimes that takes a little bit of discipline to do so. So I can understand that. What about funding? How did all this important work come to pass?
So we did not have any increase in our budget to do this. We changed some things. And so, our training budget, for example, instead of us going out to conferences and spending a lot of money that way, we brought in a lot of training and have been doing that since then. We still get to go to an occasional conference, but and the other piece that was very helpful to us was working with the Karen Purvis Institute. We were the first juvenile justice agency who reached out for training. Typically, their work had been with CPS and school districts in that world. So they were very helpful and very interested. And so they had a kind of a barter system with us, and they helped us get our initial training and donated some of that. The other thing I would say is the other cost that you can incur when you do something like this is getting kids connected to those pro-social activities. You've got to have maybe some sort of budget for that. And we do have a small budget. So we try to connect every single kid to their Spark and have them participate in that in some way. But we reached out to our community and we used social media and we went out and told our story of what our kids need. And our communities come out of the woodwork to support our kids and families. And so we have basketball goals donated by complete strangers to homes, gyms saying any kid that you want to come work out here, we'll donate that membership. Guitars coming in that we're handing out to kids who have that music interest. Local restaurants saying, hey, we'll train your kids and we'll help them get jobs in the industry if they have a culinary interest. And so, that really also offset our costs because our community was willing, once we told the story the right way, to help out our kids and families.
There's a question in the chat that, Matt, I think is directed primarily at you, is what is done to assist juveniles in transitioning to adult services when they turn 18?
So there's a lot of preparation up front for that. And I'd say that's pretty individualized based on the kid and the family. One of the main ways we're able to do that successfully, and we don't have this opportunity for all kids, but we have a faith-based mentoring program. And so a lot of the kids are involved in that. And those mentors, the great thing about them is even after we have some funding, we have a grant, but even after that's over, they stay with those kids. And so it's setting up, and just like we're talking about with these healthy adult relationships in their Spark activities, it's setting those things up. And then they have a network that can help them when they're officially out of our system. And the same thing when we're looking, I know other panelists have mentioned this, when we're looking for providers, we provide a lot of the treatment early on, but as a kid is transitioning, it's really important to find that community provider, that person at the school district that's going to stick with that kid if they're still in school. And so community engagement is a huge thing for us. And that's the best bet, I think, for these kids transitioning.
Just to follow up on a couple of those points, I think I benefit from having the brother-in-law of your mentoring program. Chris Haskins' brother-in-law lives in my county. Prior to COVID, we were perhaps in the ability to bring his mentoring program to our county. One of the things that has crossed my mind since this panel started is what about the relationship building on behalf of the one adult relationship, making the difference that makes the difference? So in my opinion, this transitioning them into their adult life, and I'll go back to Laura for that. And Matt, do you have any parting words of wisdom before we switch to Laura?
I think just briefly, just to sort of echo what everyone else has said, just get going and tinker with it as you go along. You'll have to do that anyway. But also that expect it to be a journey. It is a journey, but the outcome, if you stick with it, you'll see tons of benefit. So just encourage anybody. The planning phase is important, but at some point you just have to get going and then make course corrections along the way.
Thank you for that. But to Laura and to anyone else who wants to chime in, the object of your mental health court programs is probably to just get them engaged for their future, that they are going to become adults. With the research shows that they'll have a lifetime of having needs to be met, and the family will have some needs to be met. So Laura, can you speak to that on our way out?
I think that's true. And I think that's why community resources are so important, so that they can stay connected to the community. And so we really work to do that. We work at trying to connect our kids with some of the community colleges that can offer them some options, some training, some choices. I think that's really important to do that. And to me, it's all about the community.
Thank you. Daphne or John, did you want to add any parting wisdom about getting them connected to community services for their future?
We end up having, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so what we did with our court was we made sure we had set up a booklet of resources by neighborhood. So, and our juvenile probation department also has offices in the different neighborhoods for the kids to report to. They don't have to all get downtown to report. And so what was really nice is it had a list of where they could get counseling in their neighborhood, where they could get medication management in their neighborhood. And so we gave them those resources as they left the court. And granted, they might have still been juveniles, but if they kept that, they'd have that forever.
And now, John.
We actually have a graduation ceremony. It's a 6-month program that we do. And we actually, before COVID, it involved pizzas and cake and balloons. And then we get a certificate from myself and Henry Gonzalez. And then we give them resources. And then we let parents speak. And it was just so powerful because parents say, I feel like I got my child back again. And then they get a list of resources, as judges talked about it, so that next time that there is chaos in the home, they don't have the only number that they knew how to call, which was 911. They have multiple numbers to call and counselors and therapists and things of that nature. So we hopefully break the cycle because they would tell us, we didn't know who else to call. I thought I had to get the criminal justice system involved to get the help I needed. That's no longer the case.